The first light of dawn painted the snow in shades of pink and gold, but I couldn't appreciate its beauty. My fingers had gone numb despite my gloves, and my breath formed clouds that dissipated into the frigid air. I was alone in a landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions, the forest behind me and the frozen lake before me like two different worlds. The silence was almost complete. No birds sang in winter's heart. No leaves rustled in the bare trees. Only the soft crunch of snow beneath my boots and the hammering of my heart broke the stillness. My grandmother used to say that messages written in snow carry power because they exist between states, neither permanent nor entirely fleeting. "Intent matters more than permanence, Eleanor," she would tell me, pressing the silver pendant into my palm. The wolf's head with amber eyes now hung around my neck, hidden beneath layers of wool and down, a secret talisman I hadn't taken off since her passing. I knelt in the snow, ignoring how the cold seeped through my pants, and began to draw. The runes my grandmother had taught me flowed from my fingertip, protection symbols, warning signs, and finally, an ancient mark of territory that she said would speak to the spirits of the forest. To anyone else, they would look like random scratches, meaningless patterns in the pristine white, but I knew better. The villagers had whispered behind my back at last night's winter festival, their voices hushed but not quiet enough. The outsider, the strange girl with the pale hair who lived alone at the edge of the forest, the one who spoke to animals and collected herbs in the moonlight. They tolerated me because I occasionally helped with remedies for their children's fevers or their livestock's ailments, but fear and suspicion lurked beneath their polite nods. "They've been sighted again," I had overheard Mayor Blackwell telling the hunters. "The white wolf pack, closer than ever. Something must be done before they attack our livestock, or worse." I'd slipped away then, my heart racing. The white wolves had never bothered the village, staying deep in the forest where they belonged. They weren't ordinary wolves. My grandmother had made that clear. Guardians, she'd called them. Older than the village, older than the names we've given to these woods. Now I was here, attempting what she had taught me, but what I'd never dared try. The hunters would come at full daylight with their rifles and traps. I had to warn the pack, to redirect them deeper into the forest, away from human reach. I finished the last symbol, standing to examine my work. The pattern spread across about 20 feet of untouched snow. The lines deep enough to be visible, but not so deep as to disturb the earth beneath. I wasn't sure if I believed it would work. Part of me still doubted the old knowledge, but I had to try. A twig snapped behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. At the forest's edge, partially obscured by the shadows of pine trees, stood a wolf. Its fur was so white it nearly disappeared against the snow, but its eyes, amber like the stone in my pendant, fixed on me with unnerving intelligence. Then another appeared beside it, and another. They emerged from the trees like ghosts, silent and graceful, their massive paws leaving barely a print in the snow. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink as they formed a wide semicircle around me. I counted them with growing disbelief. 10, 15, 20, 30 in all. 30 white wolves, their breath creating a misty halo around them in the dawn light. They made no sound, no growl or howl, just watched me with those eerie amber eyes that seemed to see through my layers of clothing, through skin and bone, straight to my core. One wolf stepped forward, larger than the others, with a scar running from its right eye to its muzzle. The alpha. It approached my snow markings and sniffed them, then raised its head to look directly at me. "I'm trying to warn you," I whispered, though I doubted the creature could understand my words. "The hunters are coming. You need to go deeper into the forest." The wolf tilted its head slightly, and for a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something like recognition in those wild eyes. Then it turned and loped back to the pack, and as one, they melted back into the forest. All except one, a smaller wolf that lingered at the edge, watching me for several heartbeats longer before disappearing into the shadows. I released the breath I'd been holding, my legs suddenly weak. Had it worked? Had they understood? Or was I deluding myself, seeing meaning in coincidence just as the villagers accused? I trudged back toward my cabin, the the sun now fully risen and illuminating the vast white landscape. My grandmother's cottage, now mine, sat nestled between ancient pine trees, smoke rising from its chimney where I'd left a fire burning low. It was small but sturdy, built by my grandfather's hands before I was born, its logs darkened with age, and its windows reflecting the morning light. Inside, I shed my outer layers and hung them by the door, then stoked the fire until warmth began to return to my aching fingers. The cabin was a single room, a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs in another, a small kitchen area, and shelves crowded with books, jars of herbs, and the curious objects my grandmother had collected over her lifetime. It wasn't much, but it was mine, the only place I truly felt I belonged. I was pouring water into a kettle when a knock at the door made me jump. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. I approached cautiously, the poker from the fireplace in my hand. "Who is it?" I called. "Eleanor, it's Finn, from the village." I hesitated, then set down the poker and opened the door. Finn Harper stood on my doorstep, his tall frame hunched against the cold, his dark hair dusted with snow. Unlike most villagers, Finn had always been kind to me. His father was the local doctor, and Finn occasionally came to me for herbs his father couldn't procure. "You're out early," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I could say the same for you," he replied, stomping snow from his boots before entering. His sharp eyes took in my still damp pants and flushed cheeks. "You've been outside." It wasn't a question. I busied myself with the kettle, avoiding his gaze. "The hunters are gathering," he said after a moment. "Mayor Blackwell's leading them to track the wolf pack." My hands stilled. "Why are you telling me this?" Finn was quiet for so long that I turned to look at him. He was studying me, his expression unreadable. "Because I saw you leave the festival last night when they were discussing it. And because..." He hesitated. "Because I know you care about them. The wolves. And you don't?" I challenged. "I think there's more to them than the mayor believes," he said carefully. "My father says they've never attacked anyone or anything in the village. They keep to themselves." I nodded slowly, unsure how much to reveal. Finn had always been different from the others. More curious, less judgmental. But trust didn't come easily to me. "Would you like tea?" I offered instead of a response. He accepted with a small smile, and we sat at my little table with steaming mugs between us. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but expectant. "My grandmother used to say they were protectors, not predators," I finally said, tracing the rim of my cup with my finger, "that they've been in these woods longer than we have." "The white wolves," I nodded. "She taught me about them, how to communicate with them, in a way." Instead of the skepticism I expected, Finn leaned forward, his eyes brightening with interest. "Is that where you were this morning, trying to warn them?" The accuracy of his guess startled me into honesty. "Yes." "Did it work?" I thought of those 30 pairs of amber eyes watching me in the dawn light, of the alpha examining my markings in the snow. "I think so. I hope so." Finn took a sip of his tea, considering me over the rim of his cup. "The hunters won't be happy if they can't find their prey. Better disappointed hunters than dead wolves," I said, more sharply than I intended. To my surprise, Finn smiled. "I agree." He set down his cup. "But they'll want someone to blame." The implication hung in the air between us. If the wolves disappeared too conveniently, suspicion would fall on me. It always did when things happened that the villagers couldn't explain. "I should go," Finn said, rising. "My father will wonder where I am." At the door he paused. "Be careful, Eleanor. Not everyone sees the world the way you do." After he left, I sat for a long time, watching the fire and turning my grandmother's pendant between my fingers. The silver wolf head caught the light, its amber eyes seeming to glow. Had I done enough? Or had I only drawn more attention to myself, and potentially to the wolves? As dusk fell, I heard it, a long, haunting howl from deep in the forest, answered by another and another, until the air vibrated with their calls. The white wolves were moving, retreating deeper into their territory. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Another knock came at my door, harder this time. When I opened it, Mayor Blackwell stood there, flanked by 2 of the village hunters. Their faces were grim, their eyes hard. "Eleanor Ross," the mayor said, his voice as cold as the night air, "we need to talk about what you did today." Behind them, barely visible in the gathering darkness, stood Finn, his expression torn between warning and apology. And beyond him, at the very edge of the trees that marked the beginning of the deep forest, I could have sworn I glimpsed a flash of white. A single wolf, watching. Mayor Blackwell's bulky frame filled my doorway, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Behind his shoulder, I could see the hunters, Reed Thompson with his perpetually narrowed eyes, and Victor Petrov, whose scarred hands never seemed to be far from his rifle. They didn't request entry, they simply pushed forward, forcing me to step back. "We tracked the wolves for miles today," Blackwell said, removing his hat but not his gloves, a sign he didn't plan to stay long. Strangest thing, 30 sets of tracks heading straight for the village, then suddenly all of them turning back, almost as if they'd been warned. I kept my face carefully blank, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Perhaps they sensed you coming," Reed snorted. "Wolves don't just change direction for no reason, especially not an entire pack." Victor's cold eyes swept around my small cabin, taking in the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, the old books stacked on every surface, the curious symbols my grandmother had carved into the wooden mantel. His lip curled slightly. "We found your tracks," he said. "And those markings you made in the snow. Care to explain what that was all about?" My mouth went dry. I'd known the risk when I ventured out at dawn, but I'd hoped the falling snow would have covered my tracks before they found them. "Old folklore," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "My grandmother believed certain symbols would bring luck for the new year if drawn at first light. I was honoring her traditions." Blackwell's bushy eyebrows drew together, skepticism etched in every line of his face. "Funny thing about those symbols. Victor here says his grandfather told stories about forest witches who could speak to animals, said they used markings like that." "I'm not a witch," I said quietly. "I'm a healer, like my grandmother was." "Then how do you explain what happened today?" Reed demanded. "Those wolves were heading straight for the village. They could have killed children, livestock." "The white wolves have never attacked the village," I interrupted, anger momentarily overriding caution. "Not once in all the years they've inhabited these forests. They stay to themselves unless provoked." The men exchanged looks, and I realized too late that I'd revealed more knowledge than I should have. "And how would you know their habits so well, Miss Ross?" Blackwell asked, his voice dangerously soft. Before I could answer, Finn stepped forward from where he'd been lingering by the door. "My father has records," he said. "Medical records of every attack, animal or otherwise, for the past 40 years. There's not a single documented case of the white wolf pack attacking humans or livestock from our village." All eyes turned to him, including mine. I hadn't expected him to speak up, certainly not to defend me. "This isn't about history, Harper," Victor said dismissively. "It's about what could happen, and about interference." His gaze slid back to me, cold as the winter air outside. "I haven't interfered with anything," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I went for a walk at dawn and practiced my grandmother's traditions. That's all." Mayor Blackwell studied me for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he replaced his hat on his head. "The wolves are dangerous, Miss Ross. Whether they've attacked before or not. If someone were helping them evade our hunting party," he let the implication hang in the air. "Well, the village council would take a very dim view of such actions." He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Winter is harsh this year. Would be a shame if you found yourself without the village's support." The threat was clear: cooperate, or find myself truly alone. After they left, silence settled over the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finn remained, hovering uncertainly by the door. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did." He moved closer, his usually cheerful face solemn. "They're looking for someone to blame. The hunt cost them time and resources, and they came back empty-handed. And now they suspect me even more." Finn sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "They've always suspected you, Eleanor. You and your grandmother before you. anyone who lives differently, who knows things they don't understand. I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The pendant felt heavy against my chest, a reminder of the responsibility I'd inherited along with this cabin and its secrets. "What will they do?" I asked. "For now?" "Nothing. They have no proof. But they'll be watching you." He hesitated. "And they'll try again with the wolves." I closed my eyes briefly, seeing again the 30 white wolves, their intelligent eyes fixed on me. When? 3 days. They're gathering more men, better equipment. 3 days. Not much time, but perhaps enough. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, looking up at him. "You're risking your position in the village." A complicated expression crossed Finn's face. "Maybe I'm tired of the fear that drives so many decisions. Maybe I think there's more to those wolves, and to you, than others are willing to see." His voice softened. "Or maybe I remember the fever that nearly took my sister 2 winters ago, and how your grandmother's remedies saved her when my father's medicine couldn't. I remembered, too, little Lily Harper, 7 years old and burning with a fever that wouldn't break. My grandmother had worked through the night, brewing a tincture from rare mushrooms that only grew beneath the old oak groves deep in the forest. "You should go," I said, though part of me wanted him to stay. "It's getting late, and if they see you here too long—" He nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. At the door, he turned back. "Whatever you're planning, Eleanor, be careful." After Finn left, I moved through the cabin, gathering what I would need: my heaviest cloak, sturdy boots, dried provisions, my grandmother's journal with its fading ink and cryptic annotations. If I was going to find the wolves before the hunters did, I would need to venture deeper into the forest than I ever had before. As I packed, memories surfaced. My grandmother teaching me the forest paths when I was a child, showing me how to read the signs of animals and weather, telling me stories of the white wolves while we gathered herbs in the dappled sunlight. "They are the forest's first children," she would say, her eyes distant as though seeing across time. "They were here before us, and will be here after we're gone, if we have the wisdom to let them be." I'd come to live with her after my parents' death when I was 8, a car accident that left me with nothing but nightmares and a profound sense of isolation. The village children had avoided me, whispering that my grandmother was a witch, and that I would become one too. Only here, in this cabin surrounded by ancient trees, had I found some measure of peace. And now I might lose it all, this home, this purpose, perhaps even my life if the villagers' fear turned to something darker. All for the sake of creatures most considered nothing more than dangerous predators. Was I foolish to risk everything for them? Or was this exactly what my grandmother had been preparing me for all along? I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of amber eyes watching me through the trees and snow that whispered secrets as I walked. Just before dawn, I woke with a start, my heart racing, certain I'd heard a wolf's howl close by. But when I listened, there was only silence. The morning brought heavy cloud cover and the promise of more snow. I dressed warmly and packed my provisions, then hesitated at the door, looking back at the only home I'd known for most of my life. If things went wrong, I might never return to it. The forest welcomed me with its familiar smells, pine and frozen earth, the subtle scent of sleeping things waiting for spring. I followed a path known to few, one my grandmother had shown me that paralleled a frozen stream before turning eastward toward the mountains. If the white wolves had retreated from the hunters, this was the direction they would have gone. Hours passed as I hiked, the forest growing denser, the silence deeper. Here, far from human trails, the trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. My grandmother's pendant felt warm against my skin despite the cold, almost as if responding to the wild energy of this place. By midday, I found the first sign, a print in the snow, larger than my hand, unmistakably that of a wolf. Then another, and another, leading deeper into territory I'd never explored. I followed, my senses alert for any sound or movement. The day was waning, the dim winter light fading even further, when I heard it, a low growl from behind a fallen log. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the pendant at my throat. Slowly, a white wolf emerged. Not the alpha I'd seen before, but the smaller one that had lingered at the forest's edge. It regarded me with wary intelligence, neither retreating nor advancing. "I need to find your pack," I said softly, knowing it couldn't understand my words, but hoping it might sense my intention. "The hunters are coming again. Soon." The wolf tilted its head, its amber eyes never leaving mine. Then, to my astonishment, it turned and began to walk away, stopping after a few paces to look back at me. The message was clear: follow. I did, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The wolf led me through increasingly unfamiliar terrain, over ridges, through dense underbrush, across a frozen pond. As the last light faded from the sky, we reached a sheltered valley I'd never seen before, where the trees grew so close together that little snow had reached the ground. And there they were, the white wolves, gathered in a rough circle around what appeared to be the entrance to a cave. In the center stood the alpha, its scarred face immediately recognizable. When it saw me, it raised its massive head and gave a single, short bark that silenced the restless movements of the others. My guide stopped at the edge of the gathering, and I halted beside it, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. 30 wolves, far from any human help, and night falling rapidly. If they wanted to kill me, there would be nothing I could do. The alpha approached, its paws silent on the sparse snow. It stopped barely 2 feet from me, close enough that I could see the individual hairs of its coat, the faint steam of its breath in the cold air. Then it did something I would never have expected. It lowered itself to the ground, almost like a bow, its amber eyes still fixed on mine. One by one, the other wolves followed suit until the entire pack had assumed the same position. I stood, frozen in disbelief, as the realization washed over me. They were acknowledging me, but why? What did they see when they looked at me? My hand went to my grandmother's pendant, and as my fingers closed around it, a memory surfaced, her voice, weak but urgent in her final days. "The pendant is the key, Eleanor. It marks the guardian. When I'm gone, the responsibility will pass to you." I'd thought she was delirious with fever, her mind wandering. Now I wasn't so sure. As if responding to my thoughts, the alpha rose and moved toward the cave entrance, then looked back at me expectantly. It wanted me to follow, to enter its most protected space. The smaller wolf that had guided me nudged my hand with its muzzle, not aggressively, but encouragingly. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, into the circle of wolves, toward whatever secret lay waiting in the darkness beyond. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing me to duck as I followed the alpha wolf into the darkness. The smaller wolf, my guide, padded silently behind me, a reassuring presence at my heels. The temperature shifted immediately, the bitter cold of the winter forest giving way to the still, damp warmth of the underground. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I realized we were in a tunnel that sloped gently downward. The walls glistened with moisture, and somewhere ahead I could hear the faint sound of running water. The alpha moved confidently through the passage, its white fur almost luminous in the darkness. We emerged into a cavern so vast that I couldn't see its ceiling. Faint blue light filtered down from cracks high above, illuminating a scene that stole my breath. The cave wasn't just a den, it was an ancient sanctuary. Crystalline formations rose from the floor and descended from above, creating columns that looked like they'd been carved by artisans rather than time. A small underground stream cut through the center, its water so clear it seemed almost invisible. But what truly captured my attention were the markings on the walls, symbols etched into the stone that were hauntingly familiar. They matched the runes in my grandmother's journal, the same ones I had drawn in the snow. Some looked freshly carved, while others were so weathered they must have been ancient. The alpha stopped in the center of the cavern and turned to face me. In the ethereal blue light, its amber eyes seemed to glow. It made a soft sound, almost a whine, and looked meaningfully at the pendant around my neck. With trembling fingers, I removed the silver wolf head, holding it up in the dim light. The amber eyes of the pendant caught the blue glow, reflecting it in a way that made the silver wolf seem alive. "What is this place?" I whispered, though I knew the wolf couldn't answer. "What do you want from me?" The alpha approached slowly and nudged my hand that held the pendant. Then it moved to the nearest wall, where the most intricate cluster of symbols was carved, and placed its paw against the stone. I followed, drawn by something I couldn't name, a pull as tangible as gravity. When I reached the wall, I saw that at the center of the symbols was a small, wolf-shaped indentation in the rock, exactly the size of my pendant. Understanding dawned like a physical sensation. Without hesitation, I pressed the silver wolf head into the indentation. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the symbols around the pendant began to glow with the same blue light that filtered from above, spreading outward like ripples in water until the entire wall was illuminated. The light pulsed once, twice, and then the pendant released from the stone, falling back into my palm but now warm to the touch, almost hot. Images flashed through my mind. Not memories of my own, but visions of a time long past. I saw the forest when it was younger, the village when it was just a few scattered huts. I saw people in clothing from another century working alongside the white wolves to defend the land against some shadowy threat. And at the center of it all, a woman with pale hair like mine, wearing the wolf pendant, speaking words in a language I somehow understood despite never having heard it before. Guardian. Protector. Bridge between worlds. The vision faded, leaving me gasping and disoriented. The alpha wolf watched me, its gaze knowing, almost sympathetic. The rest of the pack had filed into the cavern during my trance, forming a semicircle behind their leader. My grandmother, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. She was the guardian before me. The alpha dipped its head in what could only be described as a nod. And before her, how many have there been? In response, the wolf turned toward the far wall of the cavern, where I could now see a series of handprints pressed into the clay-like surface of the rock, each one smaller than the last, stretching back farther than I could count in the dim light. Generations of guardians, their mark literally left on this sacred space. But why me? I whispered. I don't know how to do this. The smaller wolf that had guided me through the forest pressed against my leg, a gesture so much like comfort that tears sprang to my eyes. I knelt, and hesitantly placed my hand on its head. Its fur was softer than I had imagined, warm despite the winter cold. It didn't flinch or pull away. If anything, it leaned into my touch. A sense of certainty settled over me, deep and unshakable. This was my inheritance, my purpose. Not just a collection of herbal knowledge and folklore, but a sacred trust passed down through my bloodline. The wolves needed a guardian, someone to stand between them and a world that no longer understood their importance. And I needed them too. In their presence, the loneliness that had shadowed me since my parents' death felt lessened, replaced by a sense of belonging I'd never experienced in the human world. The hunters are coming in 3 days, I told the alpha, rising to my feet. We need to protect your pack. The wolf's eyes seemed to glint with approval, but also with something else, a challenge, perhaps, or a test. It moved to the stream and lapped at the water, then looked back at me expectantly. I approached and knelt beside it, staring into the crystalline depths. At first, I saw only my own reflection, pale hair falling around a face too solemn for its 25 years, eyes wide with wonder and apprehension. Then the water seemed to shift, and I was looking at the village as if from above, seeing the hunters gathering supplies, checking weapons, studying maps of the forest. I saw Finn among them, his face troubled as Mayor Blackwell pointed to different areas of the map. I saw Reed and Victor examining traps large enough to catch a wolf, their expressions grim with determination. And I saw something else, smoke rising from the eastern edge of the forest, where the oldest trees grew. They were planning to use fire to drive the wolves into the open. The vision dissolved, the water once again clear and still. I sat back on my heels, my heart racing with fear and anger. They're going to burn part of the forest, I said aloud, though I didn't know if the wolves would understand the significance. They'll force you out, into their traps. The alpha growled low in its throat, the sound vibrating through the cavern. The other wolves shifted restlessly, some baring their teeth, others pressing closer to their packmates. They understood danger, even if they couldn't grasp the specific threat. I closed my eyes, trying to think. I couldn't fight 30 armed men. I couldn't stop a forest fire once it started. What power did I have against such destructive determination? The pendant warmed against my skin again, and my eyes snapped open. The symbols on the cave walls seemed to pulse with faint light, drawing my attention. I moved closer, studying them with new awareness. They weren't just decorative markings. They were a language, a system, a way of channeling power. My grandmother had taught me some of them, calling them protection symbols and healing signs, but there were many more here that I'd never seen before. I traced one with my fingertip, a spiral connected to what looked like a cloud shape with jagged lines beneath it. Weather, I murmured, somehow knowing. This is about controlling weather. The smaller wolf, I had begun to think of it as mine, though I knew that was presumptuous, nudged my hand again and moved to another section of symbols. These depicted what appeared to be animals in various poses with different marks around them. Communication, I realized. Ways to speak to different forest creatures. For hours, I moved through the cavern, studying the symbols, absorbing their meanings with an intuitive understanding that should have frightened me, but instead felt like remembering something long forgotten. The wolves watched, sometimes guiding me to particular sections, sometimes simply observing. By the time I emerged from the cave, night had fully fallen. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright in the clear winter sky. The alpha and my smaller companion, a female I now realized, flanked me as I stood at the entrance, gazing back toward the distant lights of the village. I knew what I needed to do, but I would need help. Not just from the wolves, but from the human world as well. I needed Finn. The journey back through the nighttime forest should have been terrifying, but with the two wolves beside me, I felt safer than I ever had before. They knew every path, every hollow, guiding me around obstacles I would have stumbled over in the darkness. We stopped at the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to the open field that bordered my cabin. The alpha hung back, but the smaller wolf, I had begun to call her Luna in my mind, though I didn't know if wolves had names, pressed her muzzle briefly against my hand before retreating. I'll come back, I promised them. Tomorrow night. My cabin was dark and cold when I entered. The fire long since died out. I rekindled it with numb fingers, then collapsed into my chair, exhaustion washing over me. But even as my body cried for rest, my mind raced with all I had learned, all I had seen. I must have dozed off, because a sharp knocking startled me awake. Pale winter sunlight streamed through my windows. Morning had come while I slept. I moved stiffly to the door, opening it to find Finn standing there, his face drawn with concern. "Where were you yesterday?" he demanded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I came by twice. The whole village is talking. They're saying you've gone to warn the wolves again." "I did," I said simply, too tired for pretense. He stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, worry, and something close to awe. "You actually found them? The white wolf pack?" I nodded, moving to put water on for tea. My muscles ached from the long hike, and my mind still buzzed with the strange visions from the cave. "It's more than just warning them, Finn," I said, my back to him as I worked. "It's complicated. I'm their guardian." "Their what?" I turned to face him, the pendant visible now against my shirt. "My grandmother was before me, and her mother before her. It goes back generations. The white wolves aren't ordinary animals. They protect something important, something ancient in the forest. And my bloodline has always stood between them and those who would harm them." I expected skepticism, perhaps even mockery. Instead, Finn sank into the chair opposite mine, his eyes never leaving my face. "I believe you," he said quietly. "You do?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. He nodded slowly. "There have always been stories about your family. Most people dismiss them as superstition, but my father, he kept records, notes about unusual occurrences, patterns in the forest, the behavior of the white wolves. He observed that they only ever appeared when there was a Ross woman living at the edge of the forest, and that somehow the forest itself seemed healthier, the village safer, during those times. You never told me this. Would you have believed me? Would you have believed yourself before yesterday?" I had to admit he was right. Until I'd stood in that cave, seen the ancient markings, felt the connection to something far older and more powerful than myself, I would have dismissed such talk as fantasy. "They're planning to burn the eastern forest," I said, changing the subject. "To drive the wolves out." Finn's expression darkened. "I know." I tried to argue against it, but Blackwell and the others won't listen. "They're convinced the wolves are a threat that needs to be eliminated. We have to stop them." "How?" "There are 30 hunters, Eleanor, all armed, all convinced they're protecting the village." I touched the pendant, remembering the symbols in the cave. "I have an idea, but I'll need your help." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Tell me what to do." Outside, the winter sun climbed higher, casting long blue shadows across the snow. In the distance, a lone howl echoed from the forest. A reminder, a promise, a call to action. Whatever happened next would change everything. For me, for the village, for the white wolves that had chosen me as their guardian. I took a deep breath and began to explain my plan. Dawn broke gray and heavy with the promise of snow 2 days later. Finn and I had worked through the night, preparing everything we would need for what lay ahead. My small table was covered with bowls of mixtures, crushed herbs, minerals from the stream bed near the cave, soil from specific places in the forest. The air in the cabin hung thick with a scent of pine resin and something deeper, earthier, that seemed to emanate from the symbols I'd carefully painted around the doorway and windows. "Are you sure about this?" Finn asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands were stained green and brown from the preparations we'd made. "No," I admitted, carefully filling small leather pouches with different mixtures, "but I'm sure about what will happen if we do nothing." He nodded grimly. The hunters would move tomorrow at first light. Mayor Blackwell had made the announcement yesterday evening, a community safety action to eliminate the white wolf threat once and for all. They would start fires at strategic points in the eastern forest to drive the pack toward the waiting guns and traps in the west. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the previous night in the cave with the wolves, learning more of their secrets, understanding more of my role. Luna, the name had stuck in my mind for the smaller wolf, had guided me to different sections of the cavern walls, showing me symbols that had been used in times of danger before. The Alpha, whom I'd begun thinking of as Tempest for the storm-like pattern of scars on his face, had watched approvingly as I copied the markings into my grandmother's journal, adding my own notes and observations. It felt like recovering a lost language, one my blood somehow recognized even if my mind didn't fully comprehend it. "I should go back to the village," Finn said, stretching his stiff shoulders. "If I'm missing too long, someone might get suspicious." I nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. In the past 2 days, we'd grown closer than I would have thought possible. There was something about shared purpose and shared secrets that forged connections quickly. "Be careful," I said. "Remember, you need to get as many people as possible to attend Blackwell's meeting tonight, especially the council members." "I know." He hesitated at the door. "What about you? Will you be safe going back to the cave alone?" "I won't be alone," I said, thinking of Luna, who would undoubtedly be waiting at the forest's edge as soon as darkness fell. "And the symbols we placed along the path will help hide my tracks." Finn's eyes lingered on my face, concern evident in the furrow of his brow. Then, in a gesture that surprised us both, he reached out and squeezed my hand briefly. "Tonight, then," he said, and was gone before I could respond, the door closing softly behind him. I turned back to my work, trying to ignore the warmth that had spread from his touch. There was no time for such thoughts. The wolves, my wolves now, I supposed, were depending on me. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if its ancient guardians would survive this latest human threat. As I worked, I thought about what I'd learned in the cave. The white wolves weren't just animals. They were protectors of something the journal called the heart of the forest, a source of balance and power that had existed since time immemorial. My ancestors had been chosen as human guardians, bridges between the wolf pack and human communities, ensuring neither side destroyed the other. Somewhere along the way, that knowledge had been lost or hidden. My grandmother had clearly known more than she'd shared with me before her death, perhaps waiting until I was ready. Now I was learning in a desperate rush, with lives hanging in the balance. By mid-afternoon, I had finished my preparations. 12 pouches of various mixtures lay before me, each tied with different colored threads to distinguish their purposes. 6 small clay bottles contained liquids, infusions and tinctures made according to the cave symbols and my own herbal knowledge. I wrapped everything carefully in oilcloth and packed it into my gathering sack, then changed into clothes suitable for the forest. Sturdy pants, layers of wool, my heaviest boots. The pendant hung outside my clothing now, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a symbol of my role and authority. As the winter daylight began to fade, I checked my small home one last time. If things went wrong, I might never see it again. My gaze lingered on the little touches that made it mine, the quilt my grandmother had sewn, the shelf of books I'd read over and over, the window where I often sat watching the forest. Then I squared my shoulders and stepped outside. Luna was waiting, just as I'd expected, at the precise point where forest met field. Her white coat blended with the snow, but her amber eyes caught the last light of day, gleaming with intelligence and something I could only describe as impatience. "I know," I murmured, approaching her. "Time is short." She led me along now familiar paths, moving deeper into the forest as darkness fell completely. I needed no lantern, partly because her white form was easy to follow even in the dim light, and partly because the forest itself seemed different to me now. Where once I had seen only trees and underbrush, I now perceived patterns, currents of energy flowing like invisible rivers between certain ancient plants, certain rock formations. We reached the valley as the moon rose, its light turning the snow to silver. The rest of the pack was waiting, some pacing restlessly, others sitting alert near the cave entrance. Tempest stood slightly apart, his scarred face turned toward the village, though it was miles away and hidden by trees and ridges. He acknowledged my arrival with a glance, then returned to his vigilant watch. I understood his concern. Even here, deep in their territory, the wolves could sense the gathering threat. Inside the cave, I set to work immediately. Following the markings I'd studied, I placed pouches and bottles at specific points around the cavern, some near the underground stream, others in small niches in the rock walls. With each placement, I whispered words that felt ancient on my tongue, a language I somehow knew without ever having been taught. Luna watched, occasionally nudging me toward particular locations if I hesitated. Her presence was reassuring. A partner in this strange ritual rather than just an observer. When everything was placed, I moved to the center of the cavern where the stream widened into a small pool. Here, I removed the pendant and held it over the water, continuing the soft chant. The amber eyes of the silver wolf seemed to catch and reflect the faint blue light of the cave, growing brighter as my words gained strength and certainty. When I felt the pendant grow warm, almost hot, in my palm, I lowered it to touch the surface of the pool. The water rippled outward from the point of contact, the ripples glowing with the same blue light that emanated from the cave walls. The light spread, following the course of the stream, disappearing into the passages that led deeper into the earth. At the same moment, a tremor ran through the cavern, not violent, but noticeable, like the shudder of a sleeping giant beginning to wake. Luna made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, and pressed against my leg. It was time to go. Outside, the pack had gathered in a tight circle. Tempest stood in their midst, his head raised toward the moon. When he saw me emerge, he gave a short bark, and as one, the wolves began to move, flowing like a white river through the trees. "Where are they going?" I asked Luna, though I knew she couldn't answer. But to my surprise, she nudged me, clearly wanting me to follow. We traveled swiftly, the wolves setting a pace that left me breathless. They seemed to be heading in a wide arc, circling toward the village but staying within the densest part of the forest. After nearly an hour of hard travel, we reached a ridge overlooking a clearing I recognized. It was less than a mile from the village, a place where hunters sometimes set up blinds during deer season. Below, I could see lights, not the warm glow of lanterns, but the harsher beam of electric torches. The hunting party had already assembled, earlier than planned. Through the trees, I could make out at least 20 men, checking equipment, passing maps between them. Mayor Blackwell's voice carried faintly on the still air, issuing instructions. My heart sank. We'd expected to have until morning. This changed everything. They must have decided to set the fires tonight, to have the wolves driven into the open by dawn. Luna growled softly, and I realized the entire pack had arranged themselves along the ridge, 30 pairs of amber eyes fixed on the humans below. The sight was eerie and magnificent, like a jury of ancient spirits passing judgment. Tempest turned to me, and in his gaze, I read a question. What now? I closed my eyes, thinking rapidly. Finn would be in the village, waiting for the council meeting that now wouldn't happen. The preparations in the cave were complete, but they were designed to work with the forest as a whole, not to stop an immediate attack. I needed more time. Opening my eyes, I made my decision. I have to warn them, I said to Tempest. Make them understand what they're really threatening. The alpha wolf regarded me steadily, then did something unprecedented. He lowered his massive body to the ground, offering his back to me. I hesitated only a moment before climbing onto him, my hands gripping his thick fur. He rose easily, as if my weight were nothing, and then we were moving, racing down the ridge toward the clearing with the entire pack flowing behind us like a tide of moonlight. The first hunter to spot us shouted in alarm. Flashlight beams swung wildly in our direction, catching the gleaming eyes of 30 wolves emerging from the darkness. Men scrambled for weapons, some falling back in confusion and fear. Tempest halted at the edge of the clearing, allowing me to slide from his back. I stepped forward, the pendant gleaming at my throat, the white wolves arrayed behind me like an honor guard. "Stop!" I called, my voice carrying in the shocked silence that had fallen. "What you're planning will destroy more than just the wolves." Mayor Blackwell stepped forward, his rifle half raised, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the scene before him. "Eleanor Ross," he said, his voice unsteady. "What in God's name have you done?" "I've come to show you the truth," I replied, conscious of every eye, human and wolf, upon me. "These wolves are protectors of the forest, guardians of something ancient and powerful. Killing them would upset a balance that has existed for centuries." Reed Thompson raised his rifle fully. "She's bewitched them somehow. This proves she's a witch." "Lower your weapon," came a familiar voice, and Finn stepped from the group of hunters, placing himself between Reed's gun and me. "Can't you see? If she controlled them, if they were dangerous, they would have attacked by now." Murmurs ran through the gathering. It was true. 30 wolves could have torn through the hunting party in minutes, yet they simply stood, watching, making no aggressive move. "This is madness," Mayor Blackwell declared, though I noticed he kept his distance from the wolves. "These are wild animals, dangerous predators. When have they ever attacked anyone from the village?" I challenged. "When have they ever killed our livestock or threatened our children? They stay in their territory unless provoked. They protect the forest that gives us clean water, herbs for medicine, game for food." The mayor faltered, clearly unprepared for this confrontation. He'd expected to hunt animals, not to negotiate with them, or with the woman who stood as their advocate. "The girl has a point," said an older hunter whose name I didn't know. "My father hunted these woods for 60 years and always said the white wolves were different, that they seemed to watch over the forest rather than just hunt in it." "Superstitious nonsense," Victor spat. But I could see uncertainty in the faces of others. "Let me show you," I said, an idea forming. "Let me prove what's at stake." Before anyone could object, I removed the pendant and held it up, moonlight catching the amber eyes of the silver wolf. I began to whisper the words I'd learned in the cave, my voice growing stronger with each syllable. The pendant began to glow, faintly at first, then with increasing brightness until it cast blue-white light across the clearing. The wolves behind me raised their voices in a harmonized howl that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The ground trembled slightly beneath our feet, and from the direction of the cave, miles distant, came an answering rumble. The forest around us changed before our eyes. Ghostly blue light spread from tree to tree, traveling along roots beneath the snow, revealing the invisible connections between all living things. Ancient trees that had seemed dormant in winter suddenly stood outlined in luminous energy, their life force visible to human eyes for perhaps the first time. Several hunters dropped their weapons in shock. Others backed away, crossing themselves or murmuring prayers. Mayor Blackwell stood frozen, his face ashen in the otherworldly light. "This is what you would destroy," I said into the stunned silence. "Not just wolves, but an ancient power that keeps our forest alive, that has protected this valley for generations. My ancestors understood this. They worked with the white wolves, not against them." The light began to fade, the normal darkness of night returning gradually. The wolves had fallen silent, but their presence remained imposing, unearthly. In the quiet that followed, a new sound reached us, voices calling from the direction of the village, lanterns bobbing through the trees. Moments later, a group of villagers emerged into the clearing, led by Dr. Harper, Finn's father. "What's happening here, Dr. Sao?" Harper demanded, then stopped short at the sight of 30 white wolves standing in formation behind me. "Father," Finn said, moving to meet him. "There's been a misunderstanding about the wolves. Eleanor has been trying to explain." "Misunderstanding?" Victor interrupted harshly. "She's in league with them. You saw what she did. That light, that power. It's witchcraft." Murmurs of agreement came from some of the hunters, while others looked uncertain, conflicted by what they had witnessed. I looked from face to face, seeing fear, confusion, anger, and in a few, like Dr. Harper and the older hunter, a dawning wonder and respect, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. What happened next would determine not just my fate, but that of the wolves, the forest, and perhaps the village itself. Behind me, Tempest growled softly. Luna pressed against my side, her warm presence a reminder that I was not alone in this confrontation. The pendant hung heavy around my neck, still warm from the power that had flowed through it. "You have a choice to make," I said, addressing them all. "Continue down this path of destruction, or listen to what the forest has been trying to tell us for generations." The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it the scent of snow and secrets long buried. Above us, clouds parted to reveal a star-filled sky, the moon casting silver light across the tense tableau of humans and wolves, frozen in this moment of recognition and decision. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath shifting feet and the occasional snort of breath from the wolves behind me. Faces flickered in the lantern light. Some hardened with suspicion, others softened with wonder. "Doctor..." Harper stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. Unlike his son's dark hair, his was silver, giving him an air of authority that even Mayor Blackwell respected. "I've lived in this valley my entire life," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed clearing. "As did my father before me, and his father before him. Our family records go back to the founding of the village." He turned to Mayor Blackwell. "And in all that time, there's not a single documented attack by the white wolves on our people or our livestock. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous," Blackwell insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," Dr. Harper acknowledged, "but it does suggest they're not our enemies." He looked at me, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the Ross women. She called them forest speakers, women who could understand the wild in ways others couldn't." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. I stood my ground, feeling Luna's warm presence beside me, the weight of Tempest's gaze upon me. "I think," Dr. Harper continued, "we should listen to what Eleanor has to say." All eyes turned to me. The pendant felt heavy against my chest, warm with ancient power and responsibility. "The white wolves have protected this forest since before our village existed," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "They guard something at its heart, something that keeps the balance of all life here. My family has served as a bridge between the human world and theirs for generations." I gestured to the pendant. "This marks the guardian, the one chosen to ensure both worlds understand each other. My grandmother was the last guardian. Now that role has passed to me." "Superstitious nonsense," Victor spat, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. He had seen the blue light spread through the forest, had felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. "Is it?" I challenged. "You all saw what happened when the wolves called to the forest. That power has always been here, whether you've recognized it or not. It's in the clean water you drink, the healthy game you hunt, The herbs that heal your sick. I turned to Mayor Blackwell. You've lived here your whole life. Haven't you ever wondered why our village thrives when others struggle? Why our crops grow better, our winters seem less harsh, our children healthier? The mayor shifted uncomfortably. That's just good fortune. No, said the older hunter who had spoken before. My cousin moved to Riverton 20 years ago. Every letter tells of harsher conditions, poorer yields. Something's different here. The wolves are part of it, I said. They maintain the balance of the forest, protect its heart. Destroy them, and you destroy that balance. Finn moved to stand beside me, his presence a quiet declaration of support. I've seen it, he said. I've seen what Eleanor can do, what the wolves protect. This isn't witchcraft. It's an ancient pact, a responsibility passed down through generations. Tempest stepped forward then, his massive form commanding immediate attention. The hunters tensed, some raising their weapons instinctively, but the alpha merely looked at Mayor Blackwell with those intelligent amber eyes, neither threatening nor retreating. He's challenging you to see him, I said softly, not as a beast to be hunted, but as a guardian with his own purpose. Blackwell stared at the wolf, his expression a complex mixture of fear, awe, and something like recognition. For a long moment, human and wolf regarded each other in the moonlight. Then slowly, the mayor lowered his rifle. I've lived beside these woods for 60 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Hunted in them, gathered from them, sheltered in them during storms. Never once have these white wolves threatened me, though I've glimpsed them from time to time. He looked at me. Perhaps there is something to what you say. A collective exhalation seemed to pass through the gathering, relief from some, disappointment from others who had come for the hunt. So what happens now? Reed demanded. We just let them be? Pretend we didn't see this witchery? Not witchery, Dr. Harper corrected firmly. Something older. Something worth understanding rather than fearing. I propose a new pact, I said, the words coming to me as if whispered by the forest itself. The village will respect the boundaries of the wolves' territory, and I will ensure the wolves respect yours. As guardian, I stand between both worlds, a bridge, not a barrier. Victor sneered. And we're supposed to trust you, a girl who lives alone in the woods, talking to animals? I trust her, Finn said firmly. As do I, added his father. And I, said the older hunter. One by one, voices joined them. Not everyone, but enough. Mayor Blackwell looked around at the divided group, then back at the white wolves standing dignified and alert behind me. There will be conditions, he said finally. Boundaries clearly marked, regular reports to the village council. Naim, he fixed me with a stern gaze. And you, Miss Ross, will need to be more forthcoming about your abilities. No more secrets. I nodded, understanding the compromise being offered. Agreed. Tempest made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and turned back toward the forest. One by one, the white wolves followed their alpha, melting into the darkness between the trees. Only Luna remained, pressing against my leg as if to say she would stay with me. The hunters began to disperse, some grumbling, others thoughtful. Dr. Harper approached me, his kind eyes studying my face. Your grandmother would be proud, he said quietly. She and my mother were friends, you know. Though both were careful to keep it private. The village wasn't ready to understand then, and now? I asked. He glanced at the retreating hunters. Some are beginning to, others will take time. His gaze shifted to his son, who stood nearby. Some already have. He squeezed my shoulder gently and followed the villagers, calling out instructions about a council meeting the next day to formalize our agreement. Soon, only Finn remained with me and Luna in the clearing. So, he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Guardian of Wolves, that's quite a title. Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. It's a responsibility, not a title. Either way, it suits you, he gestured to Luna. I see you've made a friend. The white wolf looked between us, her amber eyes bright with an intelligence that no longer seemed strange to me. She found me, I said simply. Or perhaps we found each other. Finn stepped closer, hesitant but determined. What happens now? Will you come to the village more often, or? I'll need to, I admitted. If this new understanding is to work, I can't remain isolated. The Guardian stands between worlds, after all. I looked down at Luna, then back to Finn. But the forest is my home. It always will be. I understand. He reached out slowly and took my hand. His was warm despite the winter chill. Maybe I could visit sometimes, learn more about what you do, about the wolves in the forest? Luna made a soft sound that sounded suspiciously like approval. I laughed, the tension of the night finally breaking. I think that could be arranged. We walked back toward the village together, Luna padding silently beside us. The forest felt different now, not just my sanctuary, but a shared trust, a responsibility made lighter by no longer bearing it alone. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and growth. The snow melted to reveal new life pushing up from the dark earth. Crocuses and snowdrops, then wild roses and forest herbs. My garden flourished around my small cabin, expanded now to include plants I'd discovered in the White Wolves' territory. The past months had brought changes I could never have imagined on that winter dawn when I'd drawn warnings in the snow. The village council, after much debate, had formally recognized the boundaries of wolf territory, marking them with carved stones, rather than the fences or barriers some had initially demanded. In return, I made regular reports about the pack's movements and health, ensuring they stayed within their established range. Luna had remained with me, a constant companion who moved easily between my world and the pack's. Through her, I maintained my connection with Tempest and the others, visiting the sacred cave regularly to learn more of the ancient symbols and their power. The pendant never left my throat, its significance now known to all. Children who had once whispered about the strange woman at the forest's edge now approached me with shy questions about the wolves, the plants, the old ways. I answered as best I could, planting seeds of understanding that might grow with time. And then there was Finn. His visits had become frequent, then regular, until it seemed the most natural thing in the world to see him coming up the path to my cabin, books or supplies in his arms, eager to share what he'd learned or to help with my work. His father had begun recording our findings about the forest's unique properties, creating a formal chronicle that would preserve the knowledge for future generations. Today, I stood at the edge of a meadow deep in the forest, Luna at my side, watching as the white wolf pack taught their new cubs to hunt. 5 little ones tumbled through the spring grass, their fur still gray-tinged, but showing the first hints of the pure white they would grow into. Tempest sat regally on a small rise, overseeing his offspring with evident pride. A twig snapped behind me, but I didn't startle. I knew those footsteps now. "They're getting bigger," Finn said, coming to stand beside me. His hand found mine with the ease of familiarity. "Growing fast," I agreed. "Tempest is already teaching them their responsibilities." One of the cubs spotted us and bounded over, fearless in his curiosity. Luna stepped forward to meet him, gently nudging him back toward his mother with a patience I'd come to recognize as her defining trait. "The council voted yesterday," Finn said, his voice casual, though I could hear the underlying excitement. "They approved the protected status for the eastern forest. No hunting, no logging, no development." I turned to him, joy blooming in my chest. "The entire eastern section, even beyond wolf territory?" He nodded, grinning. Father's research about the water quality and plant diversity was convincing, and having the mayor on our side didn't hurt. It was a victory beyond what I'd dared hope for. Protection not just for the wolves, but for the forest itself, the living web that sustained us all. "There's something else," Finn said, suddenly serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that caught the sunlight. A silver pin shaped like a tree with spreading branches, inlaid with tiny amber stones. "Father had this made. The council wants to formally recognize your position as guardian and liaison." I took the pin, turning it over in my hands. "It's beautiful. There's a ceremony next week, if you'll come to the village for it." I thought of my grandmother, who had kept her role secret out of necessity, who had lived with suspicion and fear as her constant companions, how she would have marveled at this change, this acceptance. "I'll be there," I promised. Luna pressed against my leg, and I looked down to see her watching me with those intelligent amber eyes. Behind her, Tempest had risen and was gazing in our direction, as if sensing the significance of the moment. The pendant warmed against my skin, not with power this time, but with rightness, with belonging. I had drawn a warning in the snow that winter dawn, hoping only to save the wolves from hunters. Instead, I had found my purpose, my heritage, my place between two worlds that needed each other more than either had realized. The path ahead would not be easy. Old fears died slowly, and change came hard to those set in their ways. But it was a path I no longer walked alone. The white wolves howled then, their voices rising in harmony with the wind through the trees, with the rush of the stream, with the very heartbeat of the forest. And for the first time in my life, I threw back my head and answered them, my human voice joining their ancient song, bridging worlds with a promise as old as the land itself.